So how much does UTMB really cost? This is a question I dived in when quite a few people started asking me, was it really worth it? All that effort, all that pain, was it really worth the costs that went into preparing and participating in UTMB? And this was quite a profound question, which got me thinking for quite a while. And I've been wanting to do this video for some time now, and it took me into a much deeper thinking process than I had ever imagined, because when we look at whether UTMB is really worth, you need to look at two sides. You need to look at how much it costs on the one hand and how much value you got out of it on the other. And in today's video, I wanted to go onto that terrain and explore these two facets. So if we start off with the costs, there's the obvious direct costs of participating in UTMB. And these costs are pretty simple. We see them on the website. We know how much accommodation costs, etc., to actually take part in during the weekends of the UTMB. And I wanted to share with you how much that cost was on me when I took part in UTMB in 2023. So for those of you who might not have followed the full adventure and full journey towards my UTMB experience in 2023, I went into UTMB with what we call a charity bib. So this is a bib that we get through raising funds for a cause that is close to our heart. In my case, I chose to represent Le Rire Médecin, which is the kind of Patch Adams in France. This charity bib needed to raise 2,000 euros. And this charity bib enabled me to bypass the lottery. This didn't bypass the need to have at least one running stone and also the UTMB index, which we get by participating in one of the UTMB World Series events. And you need a UTMB index of at least 100k race to be able to be eligible to enter UTMB. This charity bib enabled me to bypass the lottery. So with just one running stone and the UTMB index, I could get into the race. So the first cost was raising the funds for that charity, which we could probably argue whether it's an actual cost, because for me it has a much more profound meaning and value than an actual payment for a service. It's really serving a true cause, and it takes a lot more from the runner than just paying up or raising the funds. There's a real implication in the cause, doing a lot of communication on social media, interacting with the association, and really participating actively in all the causes that they do around the events to be able to bring and raise that awareness around the cause that you've chosen, a cause that also has to deeply resonate in you. And for me, Rire Médecin, looking after those kids, was really deeply resonating within me, and I really enjoyed that part of the preparation to UTMB. Then the other cost for UTMB is obviously the entry fee, and back in those days, I think it was around 383 euros to take part in the race. Then you have transportation costs, obviously, and I had just moved abroad, so this cost is probably more representative for international runners, even though I had been living quite close to Chamonix, next to Geneva back in the days. So my transportation costs would have been lower had I been still living in that area. But nevertheless, I was flying into Geneva, and that cost me around $2,000 for the flight ticket. Then I had to get to Chamonix from Geneva, and there's a bunch of different options, transport options. You can get transfer buses, you can get taxis, you can rent your own car. I still have my family in the region, so the cost for me was basically the gas, which was probably around 25 euros both ways. There was also the cost for the toll charges that we need to pay when we go through that part of the road that takes you from Geneva to Chamonix. So that was probably around 7 euros in total. And when you drive through Switzerland, bear in mind that to be able to use the motorways, you need what they call a motorway vignette, or a motorway sticker that you need to pay, which is around 40 francs if I'm not mistaken, and that enables you to gain a little bit of time between the airport and the French section to get to Chamonix. So you're driving through the Swiss border onto the Swiss motorway to get then the French motorway to get to Chamonix. So those 40 francs need to also be factored in the cost of transportation to Chamonix if you're driving there. Then the other cost is obviously accommodation in Chamonix. Bear in mind that it gets absolutely packed in Chamonix during that weekend of the UTMB. The whole week is full. So what I did is, before even getting my confirmation for the race, I actually booked an Airbnb, which I could cancel if plans changed midway. I know it's not the best practice, but to be honest, it's the safest option to secure accommodation. Otherwise, if you wait until the last minute, you're sure not to get any accommodation because it gets really packed, or you'll be left with the very expensive accommodation in Chamonix. So if you really want to be in the center, bear in mind, try and book well before you even get the confirmation for your race. And if you don't get into the race, be sure to cancel that accommodation as soon as possible to be able to free it up for those who are actually taking part in the race. So for me, this Airbnb cost around 837 euros. I think this was for around 4 nights, so it's quite on the more expensive end of the price spectrum, but I was really in the center of Chamonix. And to be honest, if you are able to get yourself such an accommodation near the center where you don't have to commute with the car, because you will not find any parking during that race week because there's so many people. So if you can get that Airbnb or that hotel with a parking space in Chamonix, you will reduce your stress load quite a bit. I was very close to the center, and that enabled me to basically walk to drop my drop bag at the gymnasium. I was able to walk to the start of the race, and that really made my life much more easy in a race that in and of itself is already quite stressful. Then the other direct cost obviously is the foods and other kind of expenses you might incur, you know, little souvenirs and having little bites here and there during the week. So if you're an international runner, you'll be there a few days before the race to get acclimated, and therefore you'll be eating more and spending more. So bear that in mind. For me, I spent around 300 euros during those 4 days between the foods, little souvenirs, and little spending here and there, a coffee here, a coffee there. It all goes quite fast. So bear in mind that will also need to be included in your costs. So in my case, the direct costs for taking part in the actual UTMB finals event, it cost me around 5,600 euros. This is taking into account the fundraising of 2,000 euros for the charity bib. If you take that out, then obviously the cost reduces to 3,600 euros. That takes into account the accommodation, the flights, the race entry fee, and the transport to Chamonix. Now, obviously, the direct costs to taking part in the UTMB finals is not the only cost to integrate when we're calculating how much it really costs in total to take part in the UTMB finals, because this journey towards the UTMB finals is a long journey. It's not just 1 year's journey for me. It was a 3-year journey. It was a plan I had set out in the midst of the COVID in 2020, when I decided that I wanted to set myself a big, hairy, audacious goal, one that could have the potential to transform me, to give me another perception or vision or lens through which to look at the world, and set an example for my children to show them that through hard work and dedication, one can really reach incredible dreams that we would never have thought been possible otherwise. That was when I defined my big, hairy, audacious goal, and I set out this plan from 2020 to 2023, a year at which I would be hoping to take part in the UTMB finals. So what did this mean? This meant breaking my years down into milestones. So I had one milestone in 2021, another milestone in 2022, and these 2 years and these 2 milestones represented the 100 kilometer races that would enable me to get my UTMB index to be able to be eligible for UTMB. And back in the days, the system was a little bit different. We had to do 2 100 kilometer races to be able to be eligible for UTMB. As I mentioned, this has changed since. We just need one 100 kilometer race from the World Series to be able to validate a UTMB index and have one running stone. So I was doing this journey in the midst of the change in eligibility for UTMB. So my plan was 2021, my first 100-kilometer race, 2022, my second 100-kilometer race, and 2023 would be the year of UTMB. And obviously, even to take part in a 100-kilometer race, it takes a lot of preparation. So I had lined up for 2021 a series of preparation races to be able to build up my fitness towards that first 100-kilometer race, which was the Swiss Peaks 100, close to where I live. I was living back in the days in Geneva, and I was taking part in the Swiss Peaks, which was in the Valais region, which was a couple of hours away from where we live. And to optimize my costs, I had to select some races which were quite close to where I lived. And so in 2021, I took part in several races. My first ever trail race was Torgon. Then I did the Swiss Canyon Trail. Then I did the Zermatt Ultra in July. The Sierre-Zinal as well. Ultrax 2021, 50K with around 3,000 meters of elevation gain. And then finally, I took part in the Swiss Peaks 100K race in 2021. In 2022, I continued my series of preparation races in view of taking part in the Swiss Alps 100K race. Beautiful race as well in Switzerland. And to be able to prepare the Swiss Alps 100, I had to do a number of preparation races there as well. I did the Trail Blanc, which is close to where we live in Les Diablerets, one of the ski resorts. Snow race, quite original. I did the Jura Swiss Trail, which was, I think I did the 50K at that point. Then I did the Geneva Eco Trail, the Marathon du Mont Blanc, then the Swiss Alps 100. And then in 2023, I continued my preparation races, starting off with the Trail Blanc as well in the Diablerets in 2023. I did the Jura Swiss Trail again, the Geneva Eco Trail again. I took part in the Lavaredo by UTMB that year, so that took me to Italy. So that will, as you will see, increase the costs as well on that one. I did the Zermatt Ultra as well, the Verbier Saint-Bernard by UTMB, a very grueling race that took me from La Foulie in Switzerland, which is actually one of the 8 stations in UTMB, to Verbier. So one of the most difficult races I've done, but beautiful race. So these are the races that I took part in, and most of them, as I mentioned, were quite close to Geneva, trying to optimize those costs. So what I did in this exercise is dig deep into the actual costs of the race entry fees. I calculated the gas spending for those races. I looked at the hotel and the accommodations that I paid during those events, foods and other expenses that I had to spend. And each event was a little bit different from one to the other. It's not a blueprint of what it would cost you, obviously, but it's a good proxy. It's what I paid from my experience. Maybe where you live, you'll be able to find races which are closer to where you are, so that will optimize the cost. But for me, overall, the cost looked like this. The preparation and qualifying races, so e.g. the 100K races, entry fees cost me a total of 1,838 francs. My accommodation cost me 4,700 francs. And this is because in some cases, destinations such as Zermatt, I traveled with my family. So we had additional costs there. I had to get bigger rooms. We were spending more on food. For that Lavaredo race, I had to fly into Venice. Then I had to rent a car. And then I had to be there a few days before. So I had to pay extra hotel nights as well. So this all mounts up, obviously, in the terms of cost, total cost in that preparation and run up towards that incredible UTMB finals race. The transportation for all these races cost me 1,921 francs. Let's round it up to 2,000 francs, probably a little bit more in dollars. Then I had a bunch of other costs which go around it, food or other kind of spending that we incur when we go on these weekends. And that was around 2,500 francs. So in total, for the preparation, those 3 years of races and preparation and qualifying events, taking into account the race entry fees, the accommodation, the transport and the food, it cost me around 11,000 francs. So that's what it took to be able to prepare and be eligible for the UTMB finals. But those are not the only costs which we incur on the journey, because to be able to do these races, we need to have gear, we need to have nutrition, etc. And that's something that I dived in as well to check how much did I actually spend in all this equipment and nutrition on this journey. And I was quite surprised by the amount that I had spent over these 3 years. So if we look at the nutrition and hydration, I was using a mix of different brands with a big focus on the brand VALUE, and I was also complementing that with NAC and then other brands as well. And in total, just the nutrition and the hydration over those 3 years was close to 3,000 euros in total. And then there's obviously all the gear that we need for these races. I actually went through 3 Salomon packs, the Advanced Skin 12, which in total cost me around 450 euros over those years. I had my Salomon quiver, which cost me around $30. I got 2 of them, so it's probably around $60 in total. The poles, I went through a lot of poles. I started with the Black Diamond, and then I switched to the Lecky poles, and in total the poles cost me around 550 francs in total. Then we have all the clothing. I tried to stick on the lower end of the spectrum of the clothing, the cheaper stuff, which worked absolutely fine. And I calculated that I'd spent around $1,000 on clothes. And then there's obviously the shoes that we go through on these adventures, probably the most obvious item on the list. I went through 4 pairs of Hoka Speedgoat, which was my go-to shoe up until the UTMB finals. And that cost me around 480 francs. And then I had all the other shoes that I had for training on the roads. I was going for cheaper brands during those training sessions. That cost me around 300 francs. Then obviously a big part of the budget was also the watches. So I had started with the Phoenix model of Garmin, which cost me around 560 francs back in the days. And then on the run up to UTMB, I realized that the Phoenix battery would not be strong enough to be able to sustain what I already assumed to be a very long race for myself, and it did turn out to be a long race because it took me 44 hours and 42 minutes to complete the race in full GPS mode. And so I had upgraded to the Enduro 2 of Garmin, and that cost me around 900 francs. And then there was a bunch of other items, little bits and pieces along the way, and that cost me around $1,000. So in total, over these 3 years, my gear cost me around 5,500 francs, more or less, give or take, which surprised me because obviously when we buy these things along the way, we don't realize it's little amounts here and there, except for the shoes and stuff. But when we look at it now, it definitely is quite a big amount. So in total, when we look at all the indirect costs of taking part in the UTMB finals, which means all the preparation races, including the race entry fees, the accommodation, the transport, the food, and everything which goes around those events, plus your gear that you go through to be able to survive those events, it cost me around 20,000 francs in total. And when we add to this the 5,600 francs or so in terms of direct costs for the event, or 3,600 if we take off the charity bib, but this stage I'll keep the charity bib cost in there. In total, the amount of investments, monetary investments that we need to put in to participate in the UTMB finals, I get a total of around 25,000 francs. So that is really the monetary cost of taking part in UTMB. And then the final element in terms of the cost analysis is the opportunity cost. And this is the time that we actually spend preparing for this incredible adventure. And in my case, I spent about 600 hours of training between the running, between the strength training, cross training, and other activities that I needed to do. Unfortunately, I didn't have the full tracking of all my time until I got the Phoenix watch and the Garmin to be able to track a little bit more diligently the exercises. So I kind of did an estimate of how much time I spent. And then I worked with ChatGPT to try and figure out an estimate of how much it actually would be worth based on an average hourly wage, which ChatGPT set at $100 given the educational background and years of experience and that kind of stuff. And in the end, that would mean if we derive that information with the time I actually spent preparing for UTMB, we get a total of $60,000. And that's really, in the end, whatever the amount ends up being. And we know everyone has a different background, experience, value of time, etc. But that really is a good proxy of where the actual cost for doing UTMB lies. It's in your time. That time that you spent away from family, away from doing other things, and basically the sacrifice. You're aiming at something, you're driving your attention towards it, and by driving this attention towards this objective and doing this training, it means that you're not doing other stuff, and that other stuff is being sacrificed for this greater aim that you have for yourself. And this led me to the next phase of my analysis is what is the value of doing UTMB? To be able to figure out whether it's worth doing it at all. As we saw, the costs are very high, whether it's the direct costs of participating in this race, whether it's the indirect costs for all the preparation races, etc. But also the time it takes to actually prepare, to qualify and be physically ready for such an adventure. And so I launched myself onto that exercise of what is the value that we actually get it out of UTMB. And this analysis actually took me down another avenue, and I've been writing about my experience of UTMB and doing a deep dive into how much I got out of it, or even realizing how much I got out of it. And probably some of you have seen the film I did on UTMB and the very profound dimension I gave the film, because in the end I found a lot of depth in UTMB beyond the body aspect, beyond the mind aspect. We hear a lot about the elites preparing physically to be able to do these races. We hear a lot about all the training people put in to be physically ready for this challenge. And we all follow the David Goggins of this world who tell us how important the mind is, callousing our mind, being stronger than the pain, etc., which is all very true. But my experience of UTMB has taught me that there's a different dimension. In my case, it was the power of the soul, the power of needing to go into the pain cave, needing to confront difficulty, because that's where we find purpose and that's where we construct meaning for ourselves. And I found a very, very strong parallel between UTMB and that adventure and life itself, the difficulties that we face in life, and building that shell that will enable us to grind through difficult moments in our respective lives. And in the end, in this a search for meaning, for purpose, I realized that UTMB is more than just a race, more than just a physical performance, more than a mental game. It's very similar to ancient mythology, the hero's journey, all those stories we've heard and we've read about, that philosophy talks about, that psychologists relate in terms of having to confront what we fear the most to be able to become braver, and this concept of neuroplasticity, the ability of the brain to rewire itself when it confronts a challenge and overcomes it. And this is a theme that is addressed in many, many stories, ancient wisdom that we've kind of forgotten along the way, and society has been chasing the easy path in life. And what we've seen is that a lot of people have lost their purpose, have lost the sense of meaning. Through this adventure, through UTMB, what I discovered is that purpose is discovered in the pain cave. It's through this ordeal, through this crucible, that we actually discover the best and the worst of ourselves. And that is where we discover a strength that we have within us if we're doing it for the right reasons, if we're sacrificing the right things for the right reasons. And for me, it was really to try and give hope to people, to shoot for their dreams, to take on the difficult path, to accept pain as part of the process of transformation, and that without this pain, we cannot transform. We cannot experience this neuroplasticity that psychology has discovered and teaches, and that ancient civilizations have been passing on through these stories that we think are old mythology, old legends that don't stand the trial of time. I believe they still stand today, and my adventure at UTMB is not a race, it's a modern pilgrimage where we discover ourselves. And so when we come back to what is the value of UTMB, for me it's been enormous because it's completely transformed me. I went from a person who was very secular with a strong belief that science can explain everything and anything to actually opening myself to something much more profound, because when I was in Refuge Berton at kilometer 88, absolutely destroyed physically and mentally, on the verge of giving up, something extraordinary happened at that point where an incredible energy appeared out of nowhere without me even being able to rationalize it. And even though science can explain the chemical process that occurred once the process was triggered, science is unable to explain what triggered it in the first place. And I have a strong belief that we have a potential within us which is encoded in our DNA, and it's waiting for the right moment to be able to express itself. And that was the moment when it expressed itself in me, and I found something that I never thought was even possible of happening, is being able to pick myself up, not feeling the pain anymore, not feeling the sleep deprivation anymore, and grinding it through, passing hundreds of other runners in the process to reach the finish line, beat the cutoffs which were chasing me all the way. And this had a profound effect on me, to the extent that I believed it was a message I wanted to convey to the next generation. And what I didn't know during the race is that later I would be taken on to another kind of journey, sharing this message with schools, younger children, younger people, to give them hope and make them dream and believe in something greater than themselves, that they can achieve it if they accept going into that pain cave, facing that difficulty, and they will find out that they will grow in the process. And this is a message that I have now translated into a book. I've spent a long time putting all these thoughts on paper to be able to share them even further. And so for me, UTMB was much bigger than just a race. It was a transformational pilgrimage that we cannot value. How do we put a value on transforming someone's life? What is the value of our life? It's incalculable. It's beyond anyone's wildest imagination. And to be able to also impact the life of others, possibly influence their destiny, make them dream, get them to do things that they might not have done had they not listened to this story, inspire them, get them to shoot for the stars. How do we calculate the value of that? It's impossible, because it's priceless. And my message in this video is, despite the cost of UTMB, the monetary cost, the time cost, if you're doing it for the right reasons, the value is much bigger than the cost of taking part in UTMB. And for me, that is why UTMB is such a big part of my life. And I will continue spreading this message to the next generations, getting them to dream big, to believe in themselves, and to do the difficult things, accept the pain cave, accept taking on the difficulty and shooting for the stars, because that is where the growth lies. And I can only be grateful to this incredible journey of 3 years, and I'll continue developing my own pilgrimage, and I can only hope you take on your own quest, your own myth, and follow the hero's journey, because this is what we're all going through in life, whether it's a ultra marathon, starting up a business, or trying to bounce back in life. We're all going through the hero's journey, and the pain cave is the crucible that we need to go through to be able to transform and become better people.